What's up, everyone? Welcome into the Week 11 Waiver Wire Q&A presented by FanDuel. I'm Simon here, as always, with our co-host here to answer your questions, JJ Zachariason. JJ, what's up, my man?
What's up, man? I'm doing as well as I can with this Cooper Kupp and Dallas Goedert news. You know, not the best news to hear, but you know we move on and we got to use the waiver wire to make our teams better.
We're worried about JT. Then he comes out, drops a 147-yard game, and then the next superstar gets injured. Now we're worried about someone else. We can't have nice things here in fantasy football. But guys, we are here today to answer any and all waiver wire questions you have. So if you've got them, throw them in the chat, and we will be glad to get to them. Before we get into that, guys, if you're not already doing so, make sure you are following JJ over on Twitter at Late Round QB and check out his work at lateround.com. He's the creator of Late Round Fantasy Football. And if you're not listening to his podcast over there, you're missing out. We got a question in here already from our friend Victor. Victor said, "Hey, JJ, second week asking, do I go back and start Greg Dulcich against the Raiders with maybe no Jerry Jeudy, or do I pick up Cole Kmet and start him? I dropped Kmet on Sunday and started Dulcich. Oof." So are you going back to the well with Dulcich, or are you plugging in Cole Kmet after 2 weeks, 2 touchdowns in back-to-back weeks?
Yeah, look, so I talked about Cole Kmet a little bit on my podcast today, and I think, he's someone who has obviously fallen into some good fortune over the last couple of weeks. The bottom line with Chicago and that offense, they have averaged 20 team targets per game, which is absurd. It's insanely low. I mean, this is like the run heaviest team that we've seen in football over the last 15 years. And so, obviously Cole Kmet has these big outings. We're looking at the results and we're saying, oh my gosh, Cole Kmet is so good, yada, yada, yada. In order for Cole Kmet to just see 5 targets in that offense, he needs a 25% target share, which is very, very difficult for a tight end to sustain and see. It just so happens this past week and the week before that against Miami, 2 top 5 matchups in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends. 2 good matchups. Cole Kmet does very well. He finds the end zone 4 total times on 9 receptions. That kind of efficiency is just not going to maintain. It's just not. And so I actually think that Kmet's someone that you can add and then sell and trade away right now. I think he's fine to add off the waiver wire, but if Judy's out, I would feel pretty good about Dulcich, upping that target share that he saw this past week. It was only like 10, 11%. I'd feel better about Dulcich than Cole Kmet. I know that a lot of people probably think that's a little bit crazy. I don't mind Kmet. I think he's fine. I think that he's a reasonable play this week, just given the matchup, given the game environment. But I haven't researched enough yet for this week to say definitively I would play this guy over this guy, because it's still Tuesday afternoon, and typically we're getting into our following week stuff, Wednesdays and stuff, and we're looking at matchups and whatnot. But I can tell you this: I would rather have Dulcich still rest of season than Cole Kmet, if that's a little clearer. Maybe not this week, but at least rest of season.
100%. And something to consider: most of these teams are through their bye weeks now. We're approaching end of season buys, and Cole Kmet does have a week 14 bye, and then in weeks 15 and 16, he's playing the Eagles and the Bills, and they're only throwing the ball 20 times a game. Yeah. So I'm with you. I think Cole Kmet, you can start him. He'll probably have another good game against the Falcons this week, but then I'm trying to send him off if I can. And to your point, go look at his game logs. Even whenever they're throwing the ball, these past 2 weeks, high target share, but before that, 3 targets, 4 targets, 2 targets.
Right.
And that's not a knock on Kmet. It's just this Bears offense and how it's working. Nathan here said testing, 1, 2, 3 testing. You're coming in loud and clear, Nathan. We hear you. And Charles had a question for us, JJ. Charles said, should I drop the rest of my fab PPR on just Christian Watson, or a little on both Paris Campbell and Jaylen Warren?
I mean, I think that you can definitely make the argument that hang on just 1 second. I need to. Sorry.
Good.
So yeah, I mean, I think you can make the argument that Christian Watson is definitely someone that you could blow the rest of your fob on. Paris Campbell is someone that I really like as sort of like a low key ad, because not enough people are really talking about him with Matt Ryan under center. I mean, with Matt Ryan in his last 3 starts, Paris Campbell's been like a fringe wide receiver 1 in fantasy football. So he definitely should be added. I love Jaylen Warren too. It just depends on what your total roster looks like here to say if you should divvy things up or not go all in with Christian Watson. But I will say Christian Watson, 42% target share, Aaron Rodgers-led offense, uber athleticism. I think that he makes a lot of sense as someone who could pop off and be this year's like Amon-Ra St. Brown. It might not happen. But a couple weeks ago on my show, he was one of the guys that that I called out as someone who could be this year's Amon-Ra St. Brown, because, and I'm not saying that as a back patting moment, although I know that it sounds like I'm just like tooting my own horn. I'm saying that just because this was at least semi-predictable. This wasn't just something that just like totally came out of nowhere. You're talking second round draft capital for a crazy good athlete in this Aaron Rodgers led offense. He's going to have some boneheaded plays, which is what we've seen from him, throughout the season. He doesn't have great hands, but he can get open and he can separate because he's so fast. And so I do think that Watson, has an opportunity to be like that dude, that big league winner this year down the stretch. And because of that, I don't want to leave that on the waiver wire. So I'm going to be aggressive with it this week if he's out there for me.
Yeah, I don't mind dropping that on Watson. And to your point, like we talk about him being a good athlete, that maybe even be underselling it a little. Like from an athletic profile perspective, no one's even come close to like what he did at the combine or in his draft profile since like what they say, like Calvin Johnson was the last person to have better measurables than him.
Yeah, and look, he, and like in my prospect model, it didn't like love Christian Watson because he's a smaller school guy. He wasn't an early declare. It didn't hate him. He was still like in a decent spot. He had good draft capital. But sometimes athleticism translates. We saw this too. Rookie season Chase Claypool, that really translated, and it worked out for him. Obviously, he's not necessarily as big of a stud as some people thought he might be. But there are some DK Metcalf that it translated for DK Metcalf. But there's some guys where it doesn't. Like a Chris Conley, for instance, who's a crazy good athlete. And he just hasn't been able to bring it together at the NFL level. So, there's a lot to it, but having that like 99th percentile athleticism, it can work out and it can be big. And so I don't want to leave that on the waiver wire. I don't know what this guy's team, what Charles, your team looks like. And I like Paris Campbell. I love Jaylen Warren, especially because there's a report today about Najee Harris's knee not being 100%. There's a lot going on with Najee Harris in general. So I like adding those players. I just would need to know what your team makeup looks like to say whether or not you should go all in on Christian Watson.
Yeah, I will say I'm fairly bullish on Paris Campbell. The coaching staff prior to those games was hyping him up, saying they need to get him more involved. And then to your point, wide receiver 9, wide receiver 5, and wide receiver 11 in the last 3 starts with Matt Ryan since that coaching staff talked him up. And Matt Ryan looks like he's going to be the starter going down the stretch. I'm not predicting a wide receiver 1 rest of season from Paris Campbell, but in a limited sample size, it's pretty promising what you're seeing. And the volume of targets, 11, 12, and 9, like dude's getting it done for PPR. Paris Campbell is startable as long as Matt Ryan's starting. Guys, we are going to prioritize waiver wire questions here. So if you've got waiver wire questions, throw them in there. If we've got time, we will hit non-waiver wire questions as well. Come here now saying JJ kind of looks like Joe Flacco. You ever gotten that before?
Yeah, I know. People have been, it's funny. I'll tell you a quick story. I actually have a Joe Flacco head somewhere behind me because my daughter, when she was like a year old, I had this like little figure of Joe Flacco with like a real picture of his head. It was like a big head type kind of thing, which is funny because I also have a large head. and she was walking around with it and she dropped it. And so now I only have the head because it broke off. And I put it on Twitter. It's out there somewhere. It's like from a year and a half, 2 years ago. I guess it was probably like 2.5 years ago because my daughter's now 4. But I said, "Who is that?" to my daughter, and she said, "Daddy."
It's just daddy.
When pointing at Joe Flacco. So yes, I've gotten that many times before. Yes.
That's hilarious. I guess there's worse comparisons that could be made.
Yeah.
We had a question in here from Victor. Victor wanted to know better second half running back you would rather have. So a lot of these guys both of these guys are pretty readily available on the waiver wire. Isaiah Pacheco took over as the starter for the Kansas City Chiefs. Rashad White earned the start, and then Leonard Fournette going out with a hip pointer. JJ, which one of these 2 backs would you prefer, Isaiah Pacheco or Rashad White?
Love them both. Guys that I have littered across my rosters. I've been talking about them on my podcast for over, all season basically. So I like them both. But I will say, I think Rashad White is the answer here. He's already locked into looking like at least a 45-55, maybe 50-50 split with Leonard Fournette when Fournette's healthy. That could even improve. White was a very, very good prospect. His top comp in my prospect model was actually David Johnson, which ironically, David Johnson was drafted by Bruce Arians, and Bruce Arians is on this in this front office. And so I have to think that had something to do with Rashad White getting drafted. We've seen the explosiveness. I mean, he just looks more Leonard Fournette does his thing as a bruiser, and he can get those tough yards. But Rashad White is just more explosive than Leonard Fournette is at the line of scrimmage. And he's a good pass catcher, too. I mean, I know he didn't do that much through the air against Seattle this past week, but Rashad White was an incredible receiver in college. That's really what he was known for, similar to what we saw with David Johnson entering the NFL. And so that's why the comp is there, and the size and speed score and stuff was all relatively comparable. I just think that this situation in Tampa Bay is a little bit more attractive than Isaiah Pacheco, because Jerick McKinnon is locked into the third down role, the pass catching role in that Kansas City offense. You can make the argument in PPR formats that Jerick McKinnon's a better asset to have than Isaiah Pacheco. I think Pacheco has more upside because a lot can, if things break his way down the stretch, and they have a really good schedule down the stretch for running backs. If things do break Isaiah Pacheco's way a little bit and they use him a little bit more in those circumstances, he could be a league winner. I mean, he could be really, really awesome. But I do think that Rachaad White is the safer bet. We're already seeing some reports of Rachaad White just being the starter moving forward. You have that injury to Leonard Fournette, which I know Schefter tweeted and said that everything's fine, no big deal. But we've seen that before with players, and then they go and practice the next week and they're not okay. And then all of a sudden, the backup is getting a lot more work than we expect. So I have Rachaad White ranked ahead of Pacheco, but I do think Pacheco is very, very much a good asset in fantasy football moving forward.
I'm with you. Is CEH dust for fantasy now with Pacheco taking over that role?
I think, yeah. I mean, if you're in a deep league, a deep enough league, you can probably still roster CEH just to see if things change. But, trends wise, definitely has been going in the wrong direction ever since that rap sheet report. Everyone gives Rappaport like a hard time for that report that he had that one week. I think it was week 7, where he said that Isaiah Pacheco was going to be the starter and Clyde Edwards-Helaire was going to play the Pacheco role, and then Jerick McKinnon would be like the third guy. And, it wasn't totally right, but it wasn't totally wrong, because CEH really did start to see fewer and fewer snaps since then. It's just that last week was the first time since that change where Kansas City had an opponent where they could run the football on. They had Jacksonville last week. Their 2 other games, they had San Francisco and Tennessee, and those 2 teams are really hard to run the football on. And not only that, but they just couldn't, they didn't have necessarily positive game scripts the way they did this past week against Jacksonville. And we should expect positive game scripts from the Chiefs because they're good. So to me, CEH probably in 10 or 12 team leagues most likely can be dropped.
Yeah. We've got 2 questions in here about an Allen Robinson with his Cooper Kupp injury. Come here now, and Nick wants to know if Allen Robinson is a must-add off the waiver wire this week with the Kupp injury.
We should never use the phrase must-add with Allen Robinson. Yeah, look, I mean, he should be added for sure. Is he someone that I'm going to be like, for instance, I have Christian Watson well ahead of Allen Robinson rest of season right now. Because I would rather have the upside, take the chance on a player like that, as opposed to Robinson, who struggled. Robinson's struggles aren't only because Cooper Kupp was there and he was getting so many targets. I mean, Robinson had plenty of opportunity. It's not like Robinson was seeing like a 22% target share, and then Cooper Kupp was seeing a 30% target share. It was just like, there's only so much volume that can go around. No, Allen Robinson has had multiple games of really bad target shares this season. He's not the same Allen Robinson. It's very clear. Now, should he be added? Sure. I mean, he's still, part of he's around 100, I want to say, in my rest of season rankings right now, somewhere around there. He's still a top 50 wide receiver, I think, rest of season. But he's not someone that I'm overly, sorry, I'm trying to find it. Yeah, I have him at wide receiver 44 rest of season right now.
Paris Campbell or Allen Robinson rest of season?
I think that you could make if you need immediate production. I mean, now that I'm thinking about it more, I have Robinson ahead of Campbell, but I might put Campbell ahead of Robinson because of these splits. Because of these splits, but they're actually in the exact same tier for what it's worth. So I generally look at my rankings not in that linear fashion, but more in tiers. And Robinson and Paris Campbell are in the exact tier, so it was a perfect player to throw out there because, that's the kind of look that I'm like. I think that more people are going to go after Allen Robinson off the waiver wire this week if he's out there because of the Cooper Kupp injury than Paris Campbell. I would much rather spend down on Paris Campbell and get him than have to spend 20 or 25% of my FOB to get Allen Robinson.
Absolutely. So not a must-add, but someone that probably can be added. Maybe you can start him. Garrett in here, a keeper question. I wanted to know any running backs that you're trying to snag off waivers in a keeper league for next season, since we're talking about White and Pacheco. So maybe some guys where the rest of the season isn't looking great for them, but you could hold on to them for value for next year.
It's a hard question. I'm looking at some of my rankings just to think off the top of my head. Rachaad White's honestly one that you would want for next year, as is Isaiah Pacheco. I don't know. Do you have anyone off the top of your head that could fit this bill? Oh, Khalil Herbert, if he's out there, because David Montgomery's on the last year of his rookie deal. I would look at like a over the cap type site and find guys who are on their expiring deals last year, their deal, and find the backup. And Khalil Herbert's like the perfect example of that, because David Montgomery is probably going to be gone after the season in Chicago, and then Khalil Herbert, who's obviously been pretty good. He's just not seeing a lot of work through the air, which is why he's not more fantasy relevant. But Khalil Herbert could be their running back, their starting running back next year. So he's one that would pop to mind.
Any of the Atlanta backs, like maybe CP's on his way out, maybe if a Tyler Algier or something's on the waiver wire, do you think they're going to replace them? Not worth having in a keeper league.
I think I think you could go the Algier route. The problem that I see is I don't know that he separated himself so much from Caleb Huntley that he would be like a locked in, like I'm trying to think like, where would Tyler Algier's ADP be if he were the RB1 on their depth chart entering next season? Probably like a 7th rounder. He'd be like one of those like RB1s on a bad team kind of deals, unless they somehow get a good quarterback this offseason. But, it's just, he makes sense for sure to some degree, but I would probably rather go after like a Herbert or something like that. But a lot of these guys that are like keepable, like very rarely are you going to get a guy who just comes from absolutely nowhere, unless like Breece Hall is sitting on your waiver wire because he's, someone dropped him because he's hurt. Very rarely are they going to come from just absolutely nowhere and be relevant the following season.
You're right. It's going to be the Javonte Williams, the Breece Halls, maybe an AJ Dillon who underperformed this year, but could step back into a better role next year. Cyclaw in here want to know, is it worth rostering both Detroit running backs on the same team? If I have Kenneth Walker, Alvin Kamara, and Pollard as well, or drop one of them because they're struggling at wide receiver. And there's some good wide receiver pickups on the waiver wire this week. JJ, would you be holding on to both Detroit backs, or are you comfortable dropping one of those guys?
I don't think you can drop him at this point because DeAndre Swift could just see more work. He's at least trending up. He had 16% of the team snaps 2 weeks ago. It was 30% this past week, a little over 30%. Jamal Williams is seeing the early down work and seeing the goal line work, so there's value there. I don't think that you can drop either one of those guys, even though you're looking decent enough at running back. But, you have Kenneth Walker on a bye this week. You have Tony Pollard getting Zeke back potentially eventually. I do think that Pollard is going to see more work in the offense than he did earlier this season when Zeke was playing. So at least there's, that going for him. But it's not like Pollard is like a locked in RB1 rest of season. You know what I mean? So like, I wouldn't say that your running back, your running backs are good. Don't get me wrong. But I wouldn't say that they're like the best running back room in the world that you can just go and drop DeAndre Swift. And so I would still hold on to Swift. See if you can trade one of them, obviously, and then get your wide receiver help that way.
Absolutely. It is. I get that question though, Cyclaw. It does, like, what the hell do you do with DeAndre Swift right now? Like, you can't drop him, but you're sure as hell not starting him until you see him out there on the field doing something.
For what it's worth, Detroit has a really good running back schedule moving forward. I think it's top 5 according to my numbers. And so, that's at least something good that you can latch onto with these guys. I would have a really hard time. You can't drop Jamal Williams because he's seeing work. And then I'd have a really hard time just dropping a talent like DeAndre Swift.
Absolutely. Landy in here said, Andy said, hey, JJ, love your content. Needs to pick up 2 of these players off the waiver wire and has to start one of them this week. So one of them has to be able to be started this week. The players out there are Christian Watson, Allen Robinson, Donovan Peoples-Jones, Drake London, and Paris Campbell. Which 2 of those would you be prioritizing?
Easily Christian Watson. I'm way higher than the market on Christian Watson right now. I know that because I compare my rankings to consensus rankings after I do them. I'm way higher on Watson. I think he's like a fringe wide receiver 3 right now. Just in terms of like the ceiling that we could see. I'd rather be aggressive with it than not be aggressive. So Watson for sure is on that list. And then I think the next guy, it's between Donovan Peoples-Jones and Paris Campbell. If you need that immediate production, you could probably just play Watson this week. I haven't done any of my rankings or anything or my research for this week's in the matchups, but the matchup I know on Thursday is not bad for him. Peoples-Jones versus Paris Campbell. I'm going to say Peoples-Jones. I do have him ranked ahead in my rest of season rankings. But I would try to, honestly, if these guys are on your waiver wire and you're needing wide receiver help, I would do my best to get all 3 of those guys. I would probably rank them Watson, Peoples-Jones, and Campbell. But I think that there's I think that Campbell is someone that you should be trying to at least get and acquire and have on your team because his numbers have just been so good with Matt Ryan the last few weeks.
I'm going to lean Campbell here, but I like the Peoples-Jones ad. I'm with you. Just flip-flop those two, but both of them are immediately startable. And Peoples-Jones has Deshaun Watson coming back in just a couple weeks. Maybe does that give you any nerves for Donovan Peoples-Jones, that maybe the chemistry isn't there with a new quarterback and the success has been with Jacoby Brissett?
Not really. I mean, a lot of it too, Peoples-Jones, this is something that I recorded for my 10 Trends episode that's going to drop tomorrow, but Cleveland this season, they've scored 24 offensive touchdowns and only 8 of them have been passing touchdowns, which is the lowest passing touchdown rate in the league. So just in terms of how they're scoring touchdowns, 33% of their touchdowns have been through the air, which is a very, very low number, no matter your personnel, no matter how run heavy you are. So there is some regression that's going to hit. That plays into why Donovan Peoples-Jones has the most yardage in the league right now without a touchdown. And so I think that, touchdown regression should hit. The schedule's pretty nice. Deshaun Watson comes back. He's playing number 2 snaps. He is the number 2 guy. So I feel confident in that ceiling. That's really why I think I'm going to prefer him slightly to Paris Campbell, but I think we're on the same page. The Paris Campbell's a good ad this week regardless. And
anyone holding on to Anthony Schwartz, hoping that would become something this year. Donovan Peoples-Jones crushing those dreams. Steven in here wanting to know, Christian Watson or Kadarius Toney? Is this going to be Watson again for you, JJ?
Yeah, for sure. Toney, I like Toney. You should add him as a speculative ad, but I do think the one thing we have to keep in mind is that Mecole Hardman was out this past week. Juju Smith-Schuster had a concussion, and that's part of the reason why we saw an increase in snap share for Kadarius. It was going to happen. I mean, he's going to see more and more snaps as he gets acclimated to that offense, but it went from an 8% snap share to a 45% snap share. So even with Mecole Hardman, even with Juju Smith-Schuster getting hurt, a 45% snap rate is not very good. And I'm not saying that Kadarius Toney's bad. Trust me, I love Kadarius Toney, especially when they get the ball in his hands. This is the perfect offense for him, and you should be stashing him. But Christian Watson is a full-time player in this offense coming off a monster game. The other thing too, Christian Watson hit a 42% target share in that game on Sunday. There's been 11 wide receivers now, including him, to hit that high of a 40% target share in a game this season. Almost every single one of those wide receivers are incredible wide receivers. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do what Christian Watson did. That's why I think that he's easily the top ad this week. You can throw darts at Kadarius Toney. I have no issue with that, but I think you can make the argument that Paris Campbell is a better ad than Kadarius Toney, just because he's a more full-time player. Toney to me is more of a longer-term thing. But again, I still want to roster Toney just in case, things really click and they start to use him and put him on the field on 80% of their snaps or something like that, because he is leading the NFL in his 2-game sample. He does have the best fantasy points per target rate, in the league. It's a small sample, but it's still, he's been that good per target, Kadarius Toney. So, if he does get more work, obviously that's a good thing, but I am definitely leaning Christian Watson here.
Yeah. I mean, in 8 targets when the Packers only threw the ball 20 times, that game is absurd. Like that 40% target share, that's just about half of that team's throwing during that game. Henry with another Watson question, but this time wondering who he should drop. So wanting to drop a player to pick up Christian Watson and or Nico Collins. The players he's considering are Curtis Samuel, Treylon Burks, and Jarvis Landry. Which one of those, if any, would you be dropping to pick up these guys?
I think that I would rank them in terms of droppableness. I would go Jarvis Landry, Treylon Burks, Curtis Samuel. I don't mind Burks. I had him as an ad this week, but it is not a conducive offense for pass catchers. It's just not the best place to be. Jarvis Landry, 21% target share this past week. He should have a role, but I think it's a low ceiling role. And then Curtis Samuel, we've seen him be pretty relevant this season. I wouldn't necessarily want to drop him, but I would definitely take Christian Watson over all 3 of those guys. I think you can make the argument that Nico Collins is better than Treylon. I might just go Treylon just for the upside and the funness of his profile and all that kind of stuff. But Nico Collins, I don't think people realize this. Nico Collins has averaged more receiving yards per game this year than Brandon Cooks has. I mean, Nico Collins has been doing a lot better than people realize. So I do think that he's a decent low-key ad this week, but Christian Watson just, to me, way, way ahead of these guys.
Yeah. We had some more questions in here. And guys, I see all these questions. We're prioritizing waiver wire questions today since it is Tuesday. We got to get those waiver wire questions in. If we got time, we'll hit some other ones. KJ, looking at the rest of the season schedules for some of these players on the waiver wire, wanted to know which one has the best schedule moving forward? Kadarius Toney, Paris Campbell, Christian Watson, or Darius Slayton? And is that affecting which one you want on your fantasy teams, JJ?
It doesn't, schedule is something that I consider and I talk about on my show a good bit, but it's sort of like a secondary thing. I can tell you right now. So if we want to look at the Colts right now at wide receiver, rest of season have the 16th best schedule. So very, very average. Kansas City rest of season has the second toughest schedule for wide receivers. So that's something to at least keep in mind. Christian Watson, I know, is very average because I looked at that for my column this week. I think that's it. Is it Darius Slayton too? So you got the Giants. The Giants
still got the Eagles twice, right?
Yeah, the Giants are still 23rd. So they have a favorable schedule. So yeah, I mean, like schedule matters, but you're much more. You should be looking more at usage and offensive environment and all that kind of stuff first before you get into the schedule stuff.
Aravila wants to know Van Jefferson or Julio Jones to pick up off the waiver wire. Which one of these players would you be prioritizing?
I mean, I can I say neither?
You can say neither.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just not. I guess Van because of the Cooper Kupp injury, I guess, but I'm not. I mean, I'm not really that into either.
No interest in Julio touchdown Jones, the first player to score an NFL touchdown in Germany.
That's true. I didn't even think about that. That's true. Good for him though. He deserves that. He deserves that accolade for everything that he's done throughout his career.
Right. He got that one in the bag for Mr. Julio Jones. Swavey wanted to know Tony or Pittman rest of season. So Michael Pittman or Kadarius Toney rest of season.
Yeah, I'm going Pittman there. Just a very stable target share. Matt Ryan being back is good for that offense in general. Good for Pittman. He's not someone that's going to be anything better than like a low end wide receiver 2 more than likely, but he's probably not going to be worse than like a wide receiver 3. He's just kind of in that range. Whereas Tony, I don't think would get to that ceiling necessarily this season. He might in a given week or what have you. But I'm going to go Michael Pittman.
Yeah, you just got to adjust your Pittman expectations. He's no longer a wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 on that line. He's a 2-3 on that line instead. Eric and you had a question for us and also said, by the way, JJ, love your podcast and his son loves listening to it on their drive to school, especially with your great intro sound effects. But Eric's question was, is it time to drop Wan'Dale Robinson and go for Slayton or completely stay away from the Giants wide receivers?
Yeah, I mean, I'd still probably prefer Wan'Dale. He ran the most routes for the first time this season, this past week. I think that he's talented. I don't mind Slayton as sort of a dart, but I just, he's not someone that's like going to get me super, super excited. But neither guy am I super, super high on at this point moving forward.
I was excited for Wan'Dale. I thought there was a chance that he could really elevate himself this year, and he looks awesome when he has the ball in his hands, but doesn't look like it's going to happen. And then Slayton, maybe it's just me like holding – if Wan'Dale can't do it, no one can. And so I'm not adding Slayton, but I just don't have the trust that he's going to have that work rest of the year. Come here now. We'll hit this one more question. This one's a little bit more start sit, but would you be throwing in Dak Prescott or Jalen Hurts if these are your 2 quarterbacks, JJ? Dak, who do the Cowboys have this week? If I'm remembering correctly, the Cowboys are playing the Vikings this week. And then we got the Eagles have a matchup against the Colts this week. So you starting Jalen Hurts against the Colts, or are you rolling out Dak against the Vikings?
I'll probably have him in a similar tier, but I'm going to go with Hurts. The thing with Hurts, though, that's a little bit scary. He's not running nearly as much as he was at the beginning of the season. No Dallas Goedert, of course, but I'm still probably going to lean Hurts, I don't know why, Hurts in that matchup.
As am I. Guys, I want to thank everyone who came in and asked your questions today. Really appreciate you guys coming in. We can't do this show without the questions that you guys provide us. We will be back next Tuesday answering more of your waiver wire questions. But until then, enjoy week 11. Good luck in your matchups, and we will see you guys then. Adios, everyone.